everybody, to Conversations with Kevin. This is sponsored by NKU Visual Arts and SOTA, the School of the Arts at Northern Kentucky University. We have a very special guest with us today from Israel. I want to introduce to you guys Ron Prigat. Ron is an Israeli painter and printmaker. He studied at the Jerusalem School. It's the Jerusalem
Studio School.
And then he studied painted in the Italian countryside for about 5 years after that. Got his
5 summers on the summer program. Yeah,
5 summers, and then got his MFA from the University of New Hampshire, and has also studied and worked at the Vermont Studio School. So welcome. And how are you doing today? How's Israel?
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's great to be here. It's great to be in Israel. I haven't been back in a very long time, actually. I moved to the States in late 2016 and managed to visit just a couple of times. So this is my first visit here since the past 3 years. Obviously, also because of COVID, it's been hard to visit. So it's fantastic to be back. And all you listeners out there, if you ever are intrigued by Israel, I highly recommend it as a destination.
Mm-hmm. And so you're visiting family. I'm sure it's good to see them. And you also probably have missed the light and the city itself. Could you talk a little bit about those things?
The light here is kind of formative to me, and it hit me especially forcefully when I got back here in 2019 after spending several years in the United States and having enough distance to forget, in a way, what is taken for granted on a day-to-day basis. And the quality of light in Israel is very special. It's very different than even other places in, the Mediterranean. Like Italy has an incredible light, and it's different than Israel. Israel has kind of a dusty, golden warmth, and it's very hazy. And so that, you paint landscapes too. So it's kind of fascinating what happens to the distance. It's a different kind of atmospheric perspective. And so I've definitely missed that a lot. And also, I guess to your question, you talked about the city. Israel has this interesting mix of extremely modern and very current building of a country that's still growing a lot, but a history that goes back to, the Stone Age, but is very, very rich all throughout. So you have this mix, depending on where you are, of, this kind of historical type of building and a particular kind of rock that is very bright. That people usually, when they go to Israel there, I remember I had Italian friends visiting, and they said, wow, all the rocks, like the buildings, everything's white,
Do you think that was something that got you interested in art, or how did you become interested in art?
I think that there are several components here, and everybody, I guess, has kind of this nature versus nurture dilemma about themselves that you can't ever truly prove. But my dad was, making art and painting very seriously early on in his life. That ended when he got more involved in his career and the family grew, and I'm the youngest, so that was before my time. But I grew up in a house where his works of art, he painted abstractly, and he sculpted, and we had lots of art kind of around the house. And I guess, in retrospect, that influenced me, even though especially early on, my own personal interests were very different. I was drawn to kind of figuration and realism, whereas his work is very abstract, kind of modernist sensibility. So I guess that's one aspect, is kind of the exposure to art. Mm-hmm. The nature part maybe is that I was always drawn to drawing. I always drew as a kid. Partly, I would have these stack of small sketchbooks that I would carry everywhere. I specifically carry them to school, much to the chagrin of my teachers. But I would draw consistently in school, and I had kind of the world of my imagination kind of took place there. I was, kind of a nerdy kid. I would play Dungeons and Dragons with my buddies. So early on, my my interests were different, but I always had, I think, like the nucleus of later on moving into what we would now call fine arts was kind of an interest in representation and figuration that I kind of pursued later on. But I think that's kind of where things started for me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Like when I think about, like I had a good high school art teacher, but probably a year before that, I remember riding the bus and there was this kid that lived a couple miles away. But I saw in his sketchbook, he had this orc war. And it was like right out of Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh, yeah.
And people getting chopped up. And
right.
As a teenager, and at the time, one of my favorite books was, or a series of books was The Lord of the Rings. I was just like, oh my goodness, this guy's like bringing this all to life through drawing. Yeah. And so, yeah. So you were doing some of that stuff? Yeah,
definitely. I read those books. I was really interested in fantasy. And I think like this is actually an interesting point. There's something about fantasy that it whisks you away from, everything, whatever is mundane or what troubles you. And I think I found an escape as a kid, both in the books, which I loved, and in the building of these imaginative worlds with friends through the game. I mean, all those three in my mind as a kid weren't connected, but now I see a connection. The drawing was also kind of a way to go places, outside of the mundane experience.
So you're getting interested in art, and now you're obviously a working and pretty well-established artist. But who are some of your artistic heroes, maybe early and currently? Yeah,
so I'll bridge the chronological gap. Basically, I had a path similar to most Israelis where, at the end of high school, you kind of are taking a life detour and you basically serve the country for several years. And at that time, the sketchbooks, I didn't have the ability to keep doing that or the time or the ability. But when I got out of the service, I kind of found again this creative impulse. But with a bit more maturity, what I really wanted to do at the time was explore working from life. And, in high school, I think part of that desire kind of maybe set there where I had the opportunity to study art, not in my school. It didn't have an art program, but there was a beautiful satellite program in the Israeli Museum, which is a wonderful institution. It's very large. It has a sculpture garden, wonderful galleries. And the program there was really smart because they took full advantage of having access to the museum itself, and we would roam there. So it was there that I saw firsthand, painters like Rembrandt and Degas and Pissarro. And I think that kind of opened my mind, from what I was looking at before then. So after the service, I found this school in Jerusalem where I lived and grew up, which was very fortunate for me because it's a unique school. And that's the Jerusalem Studio School. There I started life drawing with my first teacher was a wonderful, still obviously around, Ariel Berlatsky is his name. Wonderful, terrific painter. And we also became friends, and that's kind of how I got exposed into a broader range of influences and began to cultivate, this kind of raw interest in representational art.
Do you have any favorite quotes that sort of guide your life? Are there things that you hold true or hold dear and true and help guide decisions you make?
Yeah, I have a few. So I realized before I tell you about this, I realized your second part of your question was about favorite artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sorry, I missed that.
Oh no, that's okay. You said Rembrandt, Pissarro. Yeah.
Rembrandt is definitely an influence. The Old Masters is kind of, what was, I've always admired them, but I was kind of reintroduced on a deeper level to the old masters at the Jerusalem Studio School. And, also began a practice of copying there. I think each of us, this is kind of something I believe in, and I share that view with my students when I teach. We all kind of have access to an incredible dialogue spanning all of human history, but we all kind of pick and choose and create our own synergy. So among those influences, like saying the old masters, of course, is wonderful, but among those are a few that are very dear to my heart. And, that changes. One's focus changes and expands. Hans Holbein is someone I was always interested in. I made a copy of The Lady with the Starling and Squirrel.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of a really great experience for me. It was incredibly hard. I didn't enjoy it for the most part, but it was formative. So Holbein is someone very dear to my heart. I love Velázquez. Rembrandt is very important, and especially when you see those artists, if you get the chance to see those pieces in real life, then you see what the paint is doing, which is extremely difficult to see in reproduction. Rembrandt and Velázquez would be two artists where I think that is really important. Yeah, I don't want to list off too many artists, but there are a few more modern artists, and some of them are contemporary that I feel interested in. Gwen John would be someone I dearly love. I think it was truly magic, and something that when you kind of pursue those influences, what I think you're trying to do, at least from my perspective, is you love engaging with them and observing them, but you're trying to absorb something, internalize it, and be able to bring to your work. So that is a huge inspiration. Someone contemporary, I give a few contemporary examples. Susan Walp, if you've heard of her, is I had the fortune of meeting her in Italy, and I absolutely admire the work that she does. So even though I have kind of this figurative interest, I've kind of branched out. And another contemporary artist I love is Ernie Sanaga, E.M. Sanaga. Really, really wonderful, wonderful artist.
The one thing I want to compliment you on is when I see your work, there's an economy that's very similar to Gwen John's work. She figures out exactly what she needs to put in a watercolor of her cats or whatever. And it's like, she kind of takes out all the extraneous things and like really hones in on the important things. And I think you have a tendency to do that as well in your work.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
When you're coming back to the United States, are you going to be able to get to New York? I know that there's a Holbein show at the Morgan Library that seems to be the show that everybody's talking about, and trying to figure out if I should head over there.
Yeah, I would love to. I don't know at this point if I can make it, but New York is one of my, I haven't gotten to travel a lot, but New York is a favorite destination because of the art institutions, and for a similar magnitude of a reason. Also, I have some very dear friends from back home who kind of took off and rooted there. So if I get the chance, that could be a real double whammy.
Yeah. And then the Holbeins at the Frick. Oh my goodness. The Thomas.
It's a great collection.
Thomas More. Oh
yeah. Amazing stuff.
Yeah. Those are lessons in painting velvet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So do you have any quotes that guide your life?
I guess I have a few. I think one of them is slightly prosaic, but actually has kind of a deep meaning to me. I don't know if the viewers had the chance to watch the film The Princess Bride.
Okay.
But one of my favorite films, I really love it. There is a scene there where, without spoiling, a person wants to know another masked person's identity. And they ask them, I really must know, who are you? And the reply is, get used to disappointments. basically the reply is, I can't tell you. But on a deeper level, I kind of think about it. It kind of stuck with me. And I think about it kind of along the lines of the Buddhist principle of impermanence, basically meaning that sometimes your attachments, emotional attachments, get in the way of yourself. We can get in our own path. And so sometimes if I feel really distraught about something, I kind of try at least to remember this quote and take some stoic distance. And I feel there's a lot of comfort in that sometimes, kind of just like, making something that seems very important a little less important for a minute and remembering a larger context. Artistically, there's a quote that I really love by Giorgio Morandi, which, forgive me if I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, there's nothing more abstract than reality. And to me, that bears a lot of meaning, because I think the wrong way to construe this quote would be to say that basically the goal would be kind of a descriptive realism. And if you know Morandi's work, that's not what he's about. But I think there's, and to me as a perceptual artist, and I bet you can relate, there's magic to be tapped into in the reality of the richness of natural world. Natural could be buildings, or could be man-made objects, but light, is just an incredible subject matter with infinite possibilities. And I think the kind of like trying to mitigate the paradox between invention and perception, that's I think the sweet spot for me. This is sort of where I see myself in the studio. That's kind of, broadly speaking, what I'm trying to do most of the time. So this quote is sort of a beautiful kind of capsule, a way to say that for me.
Yeah, I was going to say, you already kind of somewhat answered the next question I was going to ask you. And talking about your art is like, what would you like people to know about your art? Like, what things are you trying to capture? What things are you trying to give to the world when someone looks at your art?
The process of making the art is very intuitive. And when I'm interested in a motif and I develop it into a painting or a print or something, I can't always, at least not initially, say what it is that's compelling about it. It always has to do with a visual moment of excitement. It has to do with kind of the tactility of what I'm, looking at. More than anything, it's the lights. But also, a lot of times these things that suggest themselves as motifs for work, they suggest something beyond their mundane, meaning. So like if you're painting a still life of a bunch of pears in a bowl, I would be thinking like more about Cézanne than I would be thinking about the object themselves. And I kind of tried to take that point with one of my paintings, one step further, or basically the painting's sort of conceptual layers about that. It's called A Painting About Nothing.
Yeah, let me quick pull that up. We can.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about it? Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also kind of a funny anecdote about it. So, this illustrates the point for me that the painting is not about, obviously, I would say, not about a crumpled piece of paper, it's about something else. And what it is about doesn't have to be, I think a lot of times trying to describe the meaning of works of art, paintings specifically, I think, kind of cheapens them in a way, because they can't be, the medium itself can't be described with words the same way that it would be, an exercise in futility to try to describe, Vivaldi's Four Seasons. You can talk as much as you want, but there's no substitute to listening. So this is kind of the point. And the anecdote is that I think at some point, one of my professors told me that they would love to see me make more narrative work, which I have no problem with. And I think it's almost impossible to, if not virtually impossible to escape a narrative layer to the work. But I think I wanted to rebel against it because my interest was sort of in the lyrical aspect of composing, a piece that speaks for itself on its own terms. So this was kind of the inception for this work. So when I set something like that up, there was a deliberate aspect to choosing the object and the setting and making it very humble and very nondescript. But in terms of composing it, there were another set of considerations. The light, the way the composition would work. Here I'm kind of referencing one of my teacher's series of still lifes that have a very central element, and the background is cut roughly in half or in two major quadrants. So there was a whole different aesthetic set of considerations that is, to me, the heart of the piece. So that would be an example of how I would think about approaching subject matter. It kind of shifts a little bit when we're talking about different genres. It kind of shifts a little bit when we're talking about portraiture, versus still life versus, narrative pieces versus landscape. But that's a through line for me.
I hope that you take this as a compliment. It's like on Seinfeld when they're like, did you ever watch Seinfeld?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
And they're trying to pitch the show to NBC, and they're like, "What's
the show's about nothing." It's great.
but in it, like you watch just one episode of Seinfeld, and it's about so many things, even though it's a show about nothing.
Yes. No, I love this anecdote.
We'll get back to some of your artwork in a little bit, but can you, obviously light is important to you. Can you talk about environments you like to work in? I guess you like to go out into the Italian landscape and paint, or maybe out in Jerusalem, or what's your ideal studio like? And I throw in that you were at one point a manifest artist in residence. So you had access to working with the studio, with the models there, and you had your own studio. And so you've had a lot of experience with various studio spaces, both just a studio space and working outdoors. What are some of your favorite environments to work in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm a very, very spoiled painter, and my ideal setting is quite elaborate. I don't have access to something like that at the moment, but a studio setting would be different than, there would kind of be different considerations for the landscape, which is a different game, and studio work. I think it's elaborate and also simple. My ideal studio would have lots of north lights and lots of space, because I like to work with humans in my space or figurative work. When you're working on portraits, you don't really need a lot of space. But at one point in time, it would be really interesting for me to kind of pursue larger figurative compositions. So that requires more space. And where I really get spoiled is that I love kind of learning new media. And I got into printmaking. So ideally, in a perfect world, I would have access to a press and a wood shop, because I love to, I frame my own work. And making is kind of something that's another thing that's always been interesting to me. I kind of love different materials, different techniques. It's always fun to learn. So I guess my ideal studio would have all those things, if ever that were possible. For the landscape, things change. I when I worked in Italy, I kind of had someone sew a backpack that straps onto the French easel, so I could carry everything on my back, and then I could walk quite a distance with it, not being really encumbered. And I figured out everything that I need there. So that would be an amazing setting. There, what matters more is kind of the light for me. I'm very interested in I guess the warmer climes, the warmer light. My experience has been here in Israel and Italy. Those are very different kind of types of landscape, but they're both very compelling for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you've talked a little bit about your favorite studio environment or your favorite sort of plein air scenarios. What are some of your other favorite things? They don't have to be art related, like reading or music. You talked about trying Tribe of all these four seasons. I mean, that's an incredible work of art.
Yeah, it's true. I do love music, and very often I listen to it when I work. I can't really focus on. Sometimes I need silence, but I can't really. I've tried, multitasking. I love the kind of long form podcasts and audiobooks, and it's so great to be able to consume them while you're doing something else, especially if it's something that you can do on autopilot. But I found that words really disrupt my creative process. They kind of take me away. I can't really focus. Mm-hmm. But I do love listening to music, and classical music also finds its way. I think one of my favorite pieces is Elgar's Cello Concerto. If any of you want to take a listen, but the performance by Jacqueline Dupre would be my favorite. But I'm not a huge. I'm sounding like a huge classical buff, but I must be humble as I'm not a huge buff. But this would be a major piece. There's some really pivotal artistic experiences, and I think there's no substitute for seeing things in the flesh. Italy has been really incredible for me. I recommend anybody who shares a similar interest would be really enriched by a visit there. You can kind of like toss a coin in Italy and you land on something amazing. But one of my favorite places is the Museo San Marco, which is in Florence. It's basically, maybe I'm getting the terminology right because as a Jew, I kind of mix things up. But I think you would say it is a convent for friars, or a monastery, maybe. But what's incredible about it, other than the architecture, is that each of the friars' rooms had a painted fresco by Fra Angelico. And they weren't transposed somewhere else. You're seeing the actual place, and it's an incredible experience to visit there and see those frescoes in real life. They're absolutely incredible, and they're big. So even if you're very familiar with them from reproduction, it's not the same effect. From my experiences in Civita, which is where the summer program I attended in Italy took place, obviously I love the landscape there. I would recommend checking out a local artist there called, his nickname is Mastro Cencio. His full name is Vincenzo Dovoloni. And he has really kind of rediscovered the art of painting on ceramic vases, the way that ancient Greeks and Etruscans and Philistines would do. What he makes is absolutely incredible. And he's, if not the only person, at least one of the only people in the world who do that, and he's located there. And so that's something really worthwhile checking out. And that's a big inspiration to me.
Do you also like Italian food?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
What are some of your favorite dishes? And could be Israeli dishes too. Like, what are some of your foods?
Well, if you're in Italy, it's gonna be a treat. I would say, so long as you can kind of avoid the touristy places, which are not going to be a disappointment, but they're not as good, you'll have a great time. It's a really great place to seek out truffle pasta, because truffles are very fresh there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have this really beautiful experience. There are good friends of mine from Civita who had, at one point, basically, the best way to describe it is, at the edge of town, there's a sheer cliff of volcanic rock overlooking a beautiful valley. And the landscape is absolutely gorgeous. On the cliff, as you go down, there's a pilgrim's path that dates back to at least the ancient Romans. And these friends had owned a small sort of terrace home there with a cave, and they've built a wood-burning oven for pizza inside of the volcanic rock. And I had the great fortune of being initiated in the process of making Italian pizza there. And so that would be, Italian pizza may be a trope, but it's a trope for a good reason. And that experience has really sold me on it. And if ever I get to live more luxuriously, I would try to build one of these ovens
in a volcano.
In a volcanic rock, ideal. Yeah,
volcanic rock. Yeah,
Israeli food is really good too. I'd recommend that too. Israeli food is a real mix of cultures because Jews are from all over the world and Arabs are a major population here. And so, hummus is something that I grew up eating and I would sometimes make, and that's really good. It's really good, fresh. It's it can get a lot better than what you buy in the grocery store.
I have a theory that even bad pizza and bad hummus are still pretty good.
Yeah, when it comes to hummus, I think I'm a lot more snobbish. But that's maybe because I have the luxury of being from Israel. Mm-hmm. But it is something I love to eat. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I am a hummus and pizza and,
hell yeah.
And cheeseburgers.
Nice.
But it's sometimes even like bad pizza, it's still pretty good. It doesn't compare to great pizza, but
it's comfort food.
So I want to share with our viewers some of your other pieces. And you were talking about doing some figurative work. Here's a portrait that I think talks a little bit about the economy that I mentioned when I was talking about how you have the same type of vocabulary at times that Gwen John does. Could you talk about this portrait?
This was a portrait that I drew at the Jerusalem Studio School as a student. Our practice was basically to make 2 drawings a day for most of the year, and for one half of the year, and the other half we would paint. But the setting was very constant, so we'd have the same model for the day, and we'd have 2 sessions. I would say if I remember correctly, they would last about 2.5 hours net. And, a lot of the drawings I've made over the years are duds, but this is one that I'm more proud of. I think what's very powerful about this sort of middle rate time span, if you decide in advance how much time you're going to dedicate to something, either it's because there's going to be a person you're drawing and they're going to go away, or because you've set up that limitation for yourself, that can really influence what your sort of artistic desire is. And so the economy, I think, is there partly by necessity and partly because you really train your eye deliberately to see in a way that would be compelling. And that's kind of it's a little bit of an ephemeral subject, but I think it's ephemeral for a good reason, because I believe that, the moment you decide for yourself that there's a formula for success is kind of a little bit of a death blow to your artistic growth. So, but part of, I think, what I was trying to do, I was really interested in, like we spoke about before, mitigating this apparent paradox between representation being kind of like truthful to the experience that you see, that you want to be able to convey it to the viewer, and this model had incredibly interesting features to me, but in other ways it's about the light, and it's a composition, and it's about forms, and you can oscillate between seeing it both ways. And so that's kind of how I approached it. And I think one of the things I've learned to do is to oscillate between looking intently and focusing on one area, which you must do to have a kind of a measure of precision, but then zooming out and looking kind of peripherally and seeing the page itself as an entity. I forget who said it. It might have been one of my teachers, also a wonderful painter, terrific person, Eldar Fabel. He's a landscape painter predominantly, but one thing I attribute this quote to him, and that is that every square inch of the page, or paper, or canvas, or whatever your substrate is, has an equal compositional weight. So if it were real estate, every square yard, whatever the unit of measurement is, has the same worth, even if there's no charcoal or paint there. It still must be considered as part of the whole. So I think when you dilate between these two views, it helps you compose with more sensitivity. So that I think is how I would best try to describe this work.
Yeah, one of my painting teachers, William Nichols, he said you have to make every inch of your painting live up to the best inch of your painting.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Because
even if it's a resting space, that resting space has to be considered and has to pull its weight.
And oftentimes, if a piece can feel, like either too sparse or too busy, and that's something tangible, I think viewers can immediately notice if that's going on. So I think that Nichols quote is another good way to capture that.
There's one more I want to share with our viewers. I was particularly struck by this painting that you did. And sometimes my students they're like, well, I don't know what to paint, or I don't sometimes they get so worried about content. And when I see this, there's content besides the subject. I think they sometimes screw up the subject and the content. It's like, sure, this is a seashell, but then the way that you've handled it, there's content. Can you talk about this particular piece and how important it is to you and what you're trying to say in it?
I recognize this dilemma that you're talking about, and I think it's incredibly complex. And I have my own sort of views that I think come from my temperament about this. The way that I talk about this, let's say for students, is like, speaking of quotes though, like there's a really wonderful Socrates quote that goes something like, education is kind of like kindling a flame more than it is filling a vessel. And the way I take it that to mean is that I can't just impart what I know and feel to a student and expect them to carry it on and basically replicate myself. But the way I would answer this, and I tie it to the piece, is that I think you can start from different places. You can start from an idea and try to figure out how to flesh it out, or you can be excited about something. And to me, that's perfectly okay, because that means that your idea is pictorial. Your idea is about form and feeling and lyricism. There doesn't always have to be a narrative that's overt or, some kind of a conceptual or ideological layer. And so, if a student struggles with that because they think that they need to justify their work by giving it some kind of a meaning that you can explain with words, I would just suggest you can be liberated from that concern. Like we all intuitively, I think, know what's attractive to us. And even if we don't and we're unsure, you really can just go out there and look. Mm-hmm. And, when we were talking about Gwen John, like really great art makes you want to make art. You're like, oh, I love this so much. Let's do something, and then conversation starts from there. So this piece, I think, started because I did that when I was an artist in residence at Manifest Gallery. And I wanted objects that speak to me. And by speak to me, I mean, actually the way I approach it is visually, like they're visually interesting. So the first thing actually that started this piece is I really wanted an interesting surface to paint still lifes on. I wasn't satisfied with what I have there, but I tend to prefer materials that are more natural. And I spent days finding, looking at thrift stores and stuff. And finally I found this old ironing board. It was probably really old. And that's what this piece of wood is. It has a lot of characters. So that's how that started. And then I found this shell that was really interesting because it had these like very subtle shifts in temperature, and it was really complex as a shape, and it was very reflective. So parts of it would look, like opalescent, and part of it will look opaque, especially in the light, and part of it would kind of cast off kind of a greenish hue, and part of it would cast off a reddish hue. So that was just visually interesting to me. I think that also later on, I realized that the shell was interesting to me because of its significance. It's, used to carry life. It's a vessel for something. I was kind of thinking about, I was being introspective. There's sometimes some darkness that creeps into my work, and I was having sort of existential concerns, and I was questioning my own path. And I think some of that subconsciously got into the work. But to tie it all together, I think everybody can find their own reason to paint something, what we call a motif. And that can start from an idea that is, you can say in words, is that what we call conceptual, everything is potentially conceptual, or from an excitement about a moment. So to me, I remember like laying in, thinking about how the light falls on it and what cast shadow, is being created. What's the shape of that? And should it be in the center? How much, ratio of background do I want to have? And this is kind of how these things come into being for me.
And the way that you've painted it, there's other conversations that one could have. The fact that one of the main parts that we're looking at is sort of, we're starting to find the interior of the seashell, but we'll never be able to see in there. But you're trying to like give that to us, but we'll never be able to see it. And it's kind of like the Velázquez painting, Las Meninas. It's like, we will never be able to see what he is painting on that painting.
Right.
And so like there's this secret thing that's happening. And then the fact that anytime I'm at the ocean, I'm thinking about, well, where will these shells where can I find one of these shells on the beach? Where are they going to wash up? And it's a very ethereal experience when you come across one of those. And it's like, they almost like materialize out of the ocean. And the very left-hand side of the shell seems to almost like be in this state of materialization. And then the wood that you're talking about, just the way that the grain of wood also is reminiscent about just the waves and the very nature of the temporal qualities of a wave or of that shell washing up on shore, because the wave disappears and another one comes and they like leave their mark and then they're gone, and they leave their mark and they're gone. And then the light against the dark, good versus evil. I don't know if you could get good versus evil on this one, but just that, like the shell seems like it's such a precious thing, and the dark purple background or the mid purple background seems to have some sort of influence on this. And you hope that it doesn't sway the shell one way or another. The shell is just being, and you want it to stay in that state.
Yeah, thank you. I love what you said. I think like it's actually kind of moving to hear, because you asked previously, I think like I can tap back into one of your questions, which was like, what am I hoping that, how my work would work, if that's the way, what the work would do in the world. And, part of what I would love for it to do is to have enough openness for someone to come in and have their own experience, and it would invite them to reflect. I have never thought about what you said. I thought was kind of beautiful and profound, that there you understand there's an interior to the shell that you will never be able to access. And I love that. It's never occurred to me, but now that you say that, I think it's a beautiful idea. And I think one of the wonderful things about representational art for me is that it opens up the door to induce mystery into the work. And I think one of the dangers, I see it that way, some people will disagree, but one of the dangers of overly, representing what you're saying and trying to get closer to kind of something like a photorealistic rendering is you risk the chance of losing that openness and that mystery. One of my favorite artists is Balthus, and he would always talk about inviting mystery as if you're a conduit. It's something that happens. And I believe in that because I think that is what allows this kind of lyrical, hopefully from my work, this kind of lyrical layer that, viewers interact with, and it invites them inside of the painting. It's not a closed off door where everything is clear, everything's been described to, a T. So thank you for what you've said. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And then I have one last question for you. You've talked a lot about some of your teachers. Are there any other teachers that you give a shout out to, or any other people that you are really thankful that you've had the experience of interacting with and have had some sort of influence on your life, art?
100%. So as I mentioned, my very first teacher, when I just started studying figure drawing, was Ariel Berlatsky. And if there's any chance he's ever going to watch this, I'll be very honored. He's a wonderful person, wonderful artist. And, your very first teacher is very, very important. That leaves a mark. Someone guides you in your very first steps on the road. So I would, forever be grateful for his care and his particular approach. I've learned a lot from him. There's an Israeli crew of people. Eldar Faber, which I have attributed the real estate quote about the inches. The landscape painter is also terrific painter, great inspiration to me, and it also was one of my teachers. And in the United States, I would say there are a few teachers and colleagues that really influenced me. And because I'm here now, it's also kind of a comfort to know that you're walking the path that can often be very solitary, along with people or parallel to people that you care about and that you consider mentors. So Susan Walp would definitely be one of those people. She's incredibly generous as a friend and teacher, and I think one of the best living painters. Sorry if that was too much of a compliment for you, Susan, if you're watching this, but I do that. And along those lines, I would say Ernie Saniga, E.M. Saniga, is wonderful, wonderful person, really great influence on me. I really, really admire his work. Sometimes it can really be difficult when you love so many different kinds of work, because it's difficult to synergize your different artistic desires. They don't necessarily add up if you I think they do actually, but at first sight, when you love Holbein and you love Saniga's work, you can't always immediately understand what that means in terms of your own work. But I think that tension is important. It's certainly been important for me. And I would bring up two good, cherished friends, wonderful artists and colleagues of mine. One is Emil Robinson, who and is
Emil's great. Mm-hmm.
Great friend, and really supported me also kind of personally when I moved to Cincinnati, and he's based there. I've really kind of had a terrific welcome into the city. And along with him, I should also mention, everybody at Manifest Gallery that really kind of gave me a place. Absolutely. And it's a great community of like-minded people in a very small field, not too many people paint. And among the people who paint, not too many people have an interest in representation. So having a community like that is very valuable. And I guess I would also mention wonderful painter and great friend Alex Cohen, who is terrifically talented and also been a great inspiration to me, and one of the people that I feel like I walk the path alongside with.
That's cool. It's good to have that type of relationship with people and no
100%
alone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know that the NKU students and our community, and then the fact that once we do get this put up on our YouTube site, everyone in the world can see it. And I think that will make the world a better place. So
thank you so much. It's a great pleasure. I really appreciate
I really appreciate you taking your time, and be safe. And I can't wait to see you again when you get back to the States.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be great. And I would say as a closing remark, if any of you out there watching this or have a question or something, you can find me on social media or on my website, and I invite you to reach out. You're welcome.
Yeah, go ahead and give them your social media account and stuff.
Oh, it's just my name. I'm not super active because I'm trying to maintain my sanity, but I check my Instagram every so often. So forgive me if it will take me a while to get back to you. But my Instagram is my name, Ron Prigat. That's Prigat. And I have a website that is also my name, ronprigat.com. And you can find me there.
All right. Take care, Ron.
You too, Kevin. Thank you so much.